When the Clone Wars erupted across the galaxy, the conflict took its toll on everyone, even the Jedi Order. Many promising students struggled to find a mentor. Caleb Dune, a promising and inquisitive initiate, was one of these unfortunate souls. However, perhaps by will of the Force, Caleb would become connected with Debo Balaba, a renowned Jedi Master who had been in a coma since the start of the war. Caleb would spend the remainder of the conflict learning from his new teacher and fighting by her side on the open battlefield. Sadly, however, their relationship was cut short upon the execution of Order 66, the Great Jedi Purge. When the duo were betrayed by their troops, Debo sacrificed her own life to enable Caleb to escape. Hiding his identity, he changed his name to Kanan Jarrus, working as an occasional smuggler and bounty hunter, simply trying to get by. Eventually he would meet Hera Syndulla and form the rebel crew of the Ghost, fighting back against the Galactic Empire any way that they could. Kanan would also happen upon a young boy named Ezra Bridger, training him as an informal apprentice. After surviving many battles and encounters with some of the Empire's most dangerous enforcers, Kanan and his allies found themselves trapped by an inferno set off by the enemy. With no other options available, Kanan sacrificed his life in order to save his comrades. His sacrifice would not be in vain, as the rebellion eventually managed to overthrow the Empire and restore freedom to the galaxy, with Kanan's memory living on through the lives of those he saved. Cal Kestis was taken into the Jedi Order at a young age, during the final years of the Galactic Republic. Becoming an apprentice to the Jedi Master Jor Tapal, Cal trained under his master until the dawn of the Clone Wars, in which they were shoehorned into the flames of war. After spending 3 years fighting and learning, Cal, along with his teacher, were betrayed by their clone troopers at the order of Darth Sidious, enacting Order 66. The two were forced to escape, but Tapal would succumb to fatal injuries at the hands of their betrayers. Traumatized by the events, Cal's connection to the Force was broken, as he spent the next 5 years hiding on the planet of Bracca, joining the Scrappers Guild. Eventually, Cal's existence was discovered once he was forced to use his Jedi powers to save one of his friends. With death becoming almost a certainty, Kestis was rescued by Sia Junda, a fellow Jedi survivor. Though initially reluctant to join the cause, Cal eventually agreed to help Sia find a hidden holocron containing a list of Force-sensitive children, the next generation of Jedi. After travelling to many strange worlds, battling Imperial forces, and repairing his connection to the Force, Cal managed to secure the holocron, though not before it was stolen by the Empire. Retrieving the artifact, Cal took it upon himself to destroy the holocron, forever hiding the identity of the children from the Empire, and keeping them safe. Although the Galactic Empire was eventually defeated and the Jedi Order was restored, details surrounding the rest of Cal's journey remain unknown. For today's video between the Padawan survivors, I will be observing both as they appear within the main canon. Kanan will be examined up until Season 2 of Rebels, just before his blinding. Cal will be represented as he appears at the end of the Jedi Fallen Order storyline. As a side note, Cal will not be accompanied by his droid companion, BD-1. Now let's get started.
Round 1.
Kanan Jarrus was 28 years old and firmly remained within his physical prime. Kanan's muscle power was quite impressive for one with such limited training. He was capable of incapacitating stormtroopers with clotheslines, as well as knocking back the Grand Inquisitor with a well-placed kick to the chest, and also standing up to the titanic strength of Darth Vader. Although he did not make use of his Force-enhanced speed as often as some other Jedi, he was still capable of blitzing the likes of Imperial troops when required, along with pulling off the usual superhuman feats of acrobatics that the Jedi were famed for. Shapen by his intense need for survival, Kanan was also a remarkably resilient Jedi, having withstood days of torture and recovering in a few moments, going on to battle the Grand Inquisitor. In addition, he has persevered through a stabbing wound and continued fighting. Kanan Jarrus might not be the most daunting Jedi in the galaxy, but he has honed his physicality to a respectable level, all things considered. From what I could find, Cal Kestis' age is not actually detailed in any source. Judging from his appearance, he was most likely in his late teens, just breaching his physical prime. Cal's fighting style was very sporadic and fast-paced. As such, the young Jedi was very nimble and spry in battle, capable of outmaneuvering multiple Imperial troops at once. Though not particularly imposing and sporting an otherwise small build, Kestis made use of some competent degrees of strength, having repeatedly overpowered stormtroopers, and although he struggled to contend with Darth Vader, he did manage to hold back the power of the Ninth Sister. As a teenager, Cal boasted the vigor of youth and enhanced it through his connection to the Force, able to run across walls and leap over large distances. His endurance is hard to gauge, however, he has traversed the unforgiving terrain of worlds such as Dathomir, and when escaping the betrayal brought forth by the clones, he withstood a blaster bolt grazing his face. He also withstood a grazing blow from a lightsaber, as well as a long fall onto a speeding train. All things considered, Cal Kestis is shaping up to be a very promising Jedi Knight. Comparing these two is rather interesting, as they are almost complete opposites of one another, as one holds a greater advantage through their strength, while the other is more reliant on the benefits of agility and dexterity. However, given how Kanan was able to keep pace with the likes of the Inquisitors, I don't think Cal would be able to use his speed to overwhelm his fellow Jedi. Furthermore, Kanan has demonstrated superior degrees of strength and is ultimately more resilient. Although I doubt this contest would degrade into something of a brawl, if it were to come down to physical blows, Kanan would have the upper hand, and as a result, the physical advantage is awarded to Kanan Jarrus.
Round 2.
As his training was cut short, Kanan Jarrus never attained mastery over any given lightsaber style. However, he did still manage to develop a reliable set of skills that aided in his survival against the Empire. Kanan was trained by his master in the third form of lightsaber combat, also known as Surisu, a lightsaber style based around the art of defense, embodying Jedi pacifism, and allowing its practitioners to survive against almost anything. Kanan was criticized by the Grand Inquisitor for being over-reliant on the form, or in quote, to a ridiculous degree, apparently falling into the trap of Form 3 specialists, only delaying the inevitable. Despite this, Kanan began to work on his skills after his first battle with the Inquisitor, and made some notable improvements to his technique, having displayed a moderate ability with dual sabers, as well as showing that he could open opponents up to attack, as he did so in his penultimate battle with the Grand Inquisitor, using a high guard, giving him room to employ the kick to the chest that I had mentioned earlier. Kanan's best showing was his defeat of the Grand Inquisitor, where he incorporated the use of blaster fire from Ezra's Blaster Saber hybrid. However, this showing never seemed to stick, as Kanan never made use of this technique before or after this duel. There is also the factor that Kanan didn't manage to secure victory until after he had witnessed the supposed death of Ezra, which further motivated him, a similar scenario to when he was blinded by Darth Maul, forcing him to rely on the Force to guide his actions. This is not a slight against Kanan, as he did still manage to consistently contend with the rest of the Inquisitors, yet he never seemed to surpass them. Despite his flaws, Kanan Jarrus was by no means an incompetent lightsaber duelist. His shortcomings seem to stem more from his misfortune of not being able to complete his training. Regardless, Kanan engaged Imperial forces several times, and even briefly held back Darth Vader. All things considered, Jarrus had what it took to make a fine swordsman. Cal Kestis is both an interesting and simultaneously difficult combatant to analyze, as there is virtually no background information relating to his skills as a duelist. There is also the case of what gameplay techniques should and shouldn't be considered canon to the character. In my personal interpretation, the various moves and techniques that the player is able to unlock for the character symbolizes Cal's growth as a combatant, and unless we receive source material that suggests otherwise, I'm inclined to treat them as closest to fact. The choreography behind Cal's swordplay was fast-paced, yet wild and sporadic. When accounting for this, as well as his incomplete training, I believe it is fair to say that Cal Kestis most likely relied on the tenets of Form 1 Shi-Cho. This style was intended for use as a basic tutorial form, covering the basics on all aspects for Jedi, as well as excelling against multiple adversaries, along with the ability to forcefully disarm opponents. Cal's use of this style can be seen through the various full-body motions that he makes use of in battle, as well as his ability to contend with squads of stormtroopers single-handedly. During his first encounter with the Second Sister, aka Trilla, the Dark Acolyte commented on the young Jedi's saber stance. Given how Cal's master was a use of the saber staff, along with Cal's ability to make use of such a weapon, along with the occasional incorporation of Jarkai dual sabers, it stands to reason that Jaro Tapal may have instructed his Padawan in the basics of Form 6 Naiman, a style based around moderation and making use of multiple techniques borrowed from other styles. In addition, Cal made use of the occasional unarmed attack, utilizing maneuvers such as ankle sweeps, kicking an opponent's legs out from underneath them, opening them up to a finishing blow. Although his training was incomplete, Cal appeared to be a rather promising duelist. He managed to withstand Trilla's onslaught during each of their battles, growing closer to her skill level with each encounter. There is also the factor of his defeat of the fallen Jedi Master Taron Malicos. Although it was noted that he would have lost the fight if it weren't for the intervention of the Night Sister Merrin, Cal still held his own for roughly half of the fight on his own. Perhaps the most interesting factor of Kestis' form was his apparent use of Trikata. This lightsaber style was a unique case and not often seen. Its focus was based around taking advantage of the lightsaber's most unique feature, the retractable blade. By using this form, practitioners had an inherent ability to catch even those proficient duelists off guard. While I find it highly unlikely that a Padawan would be trained in such a devious form, Cal's need to self-train in order to survive propelled him to make use of such tactics. This can be seen by how he switches between forms and stances on a dime, throwing out a twin-bladed flurry when switching between the uses of his weapon's standard and staff functions. Another example comes directly from his penultimate battle with Trilla, where he used a Trikata-style tactic to disarm the Inquisitor of her weapon. Whether by necessity or by ambition, Cal Kestis consistently improved his abilities over the course of the Fallen Order storyline, as even Sia Junda picked up on Cal's growing confidence. Having battled against the Empire's forces, Cal Kestis continued to be a persistent thorn in their side, and his skills will surely develop further, should we see him on more adventures. This is an interesting verdict, but before we get into the nitty-gritty of who is the better duelist, let's discuss the elephant in the room, the battles these Jedi had with Darth Vader. I've seen others use these battles as a way of determining who is the better combatant, as Cal fought Vader 5 years after Episode 3, while Kanan fought a supposedly more experienced version of the Sith Lord. However, I personally don't think that these fights can give us an accurate portrayal of who is superior, as both battles had different circumstances behind them. When Vader fought Cal, he asserted his dominance as much as possible, as he intended to retrieve the Jedi holocron from the young man. By contrast, when he fought Kanan and Ezra, Vader's intention was to keep the Jedi occupied whilst his troops dealt with the rebels, and this can be seen as he largely resorted to close-quarters saber locks, as opposed to fully asserting himself as he did against Kestis. Personally, I believe that the engagements these Jedi had with the Inquisitors to be far more reliable for our assessment. And from there, I'm inclined to believe that Cal has the advantage here. Cal's abilities continue to develop and improve, whereas Kanan's seemed to cap out once he had defeated the Grand Inquisitor. Furthermore, Cal achieved his victories without the epiphany in the Force that motivated Kanan. If Jarrus were to make a more consistent use of his twin blast saber technique, he would be a match for Cal's varied and unorthodox mix and match style. But as it stands, Cal has the better achievements, having defeated Imperial forces of similar caliber, even besting the Ninth Sister, while his connection to the Force was still damaged. Kanan will not be overwhelmed immediately, as he can hold out against opponents who make use of similar styles, but as it stands, retaliating will be a difficult affair. Resulting from his more varied tactics and superior growth as a swordsman, Kestis is awarded the edge as a lightsaber duelist.
Round 3.
Much like his abilities with the lightsaber, Kanan's force powers were still in development as a result of his incomplete training. Despite his misfortune, however, he was still a promising wielder of the Force. He possessed an adept Force sense, detecting the presence of Ezra Bridger. Kanan had a rather impressive ability with telepathy. Beyond uses of the basic Jedi mind trick and knowledge of beast manipulation that he passed on to Ezra, he showcased a remarkable resistance to the Grand Inquisitor's attempts at probing his mind, something of which impressed both the Dark Jedi and Grand Moff Tarkin. This is made all the more impressive when taking into account that the Grand Inquisitor's mind was considered his most powerful weapon. Jarrus could also make use of basic telekinetic attacks. As to be expected, he could scatter small groups of opponents with metaphysical shoves, along with pulling troops in for a clothesline attack. In addition, he has managed to hold up a cave-in, suggesting that he had a natural amount of potency in his abilities. Although he could make use of force pushes against fellow force wielders, when their attention was diverted away from him, he's never made use of them when engaged in direct combat. In addition, his force wall was broken multiple times, suggesting that he still had a ways to go. Nevertheless, Kanan had a natural talent, and with the right guidance, he could prove himself worthy of the title of Jedi Knight. Much like his dueling abilities, it's easy to assume that a lot of Cal's force powers are solely attributed to game mechanics. However, I personally interpret the expanding move list to be symbolic of his growth and developing skill with the Force, just as his confidence grew with his battle prowess. Cal's use of the Force was more tactical than it was powerful, which gave him more options in battle. Kestis could make use of various telekinetic attacks, including things such as manipulation of his lightsaber, force repulses and waves, as well as force pulls to close the gap between himself and his enemies. When cornered by Darth Vader, he used a telekinetic shove to shatter a hole in the glass tunnel, allowing him and Seer to escape, while the Sith focused his attention on holding back the surge of water. Although the mechanics of the game might leave some to believe that he had trouble penetrating force walls, I would liken this more to a result of artificial difficulty on part of the developers. Either way, when presented with an opening, Cal could knock opponents back with his metaphysical might, hurling the Ninth Sister at the conclusion of their fight, despite the fact that his connection to the Force wasn't fully healed yet. Though when confronted with more experienced users of the Force, he was easily overwhelmed. Rather interestingly, Cal possessed the rare ability of psychometric reading, which allowed him to read what others would refer to as the memories of objects. Although an interesting power and useful for investigation, this has little use in a fight. Cal's signature power, and one he remained proficient with when his connection to the Force was broken, was Force Stasis, also known as Force Stun. This power was used to slow the momentum of threats, granting the user potential openings for escape or advantages to seize in battle. When used on a living target, this power would deaden their nervous system, slowing their momentum to a crawl, as Cal demonstrated when he froze a group of clones upon his master's death. Cal could also apply this power to slow the momentum of falling people and objects, and potentially slow the momentum of blaster bolts, an achievement similar to the one performed by Kylo Ren in the opening of The Force Awakens, though obviously not as powerful. When combining all of these abilities together in conjunction with his unusual fighting style, Cal Kestis has a great many options at his disposal, and when used in tandem with his unorthodox fighting style, the young Jedi has what it takes to give him the best possible advantage in a fight. This was interesting for me to run down. Although Kanan's feat with the cave-in suggests he might possess more natural raw power, he tends to only use his abilities when he is presented with an opening, or when his opponent is distracted. While Cal's use of the Force is similar in a tactical sense, it is ultimately more practical, as he makes use of better variety and is more adept at creating said openings. On top of that, his greater variety will grant him more ways to throw his fellow Jedi off. Due to his greater tactical use of his talents, Cal Kestis earns the advantage in Force powers.
Round 4.
Kanan carried a standard lightsaber with a blue crystal, emitting a sapphire blade. The weapon could be disassembled for better concealment, but it was otherwise fairly standard. Jarrus also carried a DL-18 blaster pistol, granting him the option of attacking opponents from mid-range distances with moderate firepower. While Kanan's arsenal was decidedly standard, it still proved to be effective. Kestis possessed a rather interesting lightsaber. Originally a damaged saber staff passed on to him by his master, Cal eventually repaired and modified the weapon in order to allow the hilt to be separated into twin lightsabers, granting him a greater degree of options in battle. The full-length hilt appeared to be slightly shorter than that of a traditional saber staff, and more akin to the one wielded by Darth Zana. Presumably the shorter hilt made the weapon easier to use as a standard saber, without the cumbersome length of the usual double-bladed weapon, whilst also maintaining all of its benefits. Overall, Kestis possessed a weapon as useful and unorthodox as his fighting style, bolstering his options in battle. This one is the simplest call to make. In terms of comparing lightsabers, Kanan is simply outclassed. When factoring in his blaster pistol, this does close the gap, though only marginally, as he doesn't tend to make use of it. Even if he did, the options provided by Cal's separable weapon are more numerous in number, bolstering his fighting style, and ultimately making it more effective. And as such, Kestis is granted the advantage in weaponry.
Final round.
Despite having to endure the tragedy of betrayal and being forced to survive with incomplete training, both Kanan Jarrus and Kestis showed that they had what it took to persevere and become great Jedi Knights. For this battle, the final tally ranges from a 7 to 8 out of 10 advantage to the victor. Initially, the contest would begin as a standard lightsaber duel. After a few minutes of neither being able to find an opening in the other's form, Cal begins to switch up his fighting style in an attempt to throw off his fellow Jedi. Surprised by this, Kanan retreats backward, eventually employing a high guard and following up with a powerful kick to the chest, stunning Cal and knocking him back. Before he can take full advantage of his newfound opening, Cal responds with one of his unusual and varied force powers, slowing Kanan's momentum with force stun, or knocking him back with a telekinetic shove, buying himself the opportunity to recover and return to battle. Now incorporating these abilities into his offensive, Cal continuously manages to drive Kanan back, constantly switching things up whilst making sure to avoid any of his opponent's powerful blows. If Kanan were inclined to make use of his blaster in tandem with his lightsaber, he'd be a match to Cal's unorthodox offensive. But as it stands, the young Jedi simply keeps his momentum going. After several more minutes of probing away at Kanan's defenses, Cal eventually manages to tag and disarm, but not kill his fellow Padawan survivor. As such, Kestis, the Jedi survivor, is declared the victor. Well, thanks for watching this new installment in the Versus series, guys. This matchup came to me during my first playthrough of Jedi Fallen Order, and I thought it would be interesting and cool to see. If I'm not mistaken, this may be the first time that Kestis has been used in a Versus video, so I hope you found his debut enjoyable. Well, I've said enough for now, so until next time, follow me on social media to keep up to date with the channel, force push the like button if you enjoyed, and of course, may the Force be with you. Always.